I was sitting at my kitchen table in Phoenix, Arizona, enjoying my Saturday morning coffee when the certified mail arrived that would turn my entire world upside down. The envelope looked official, with a return address from something called Superior Court Processing Division, and marked urgent in red letters across the front. My hands actually shook as I tore it open, because nobody expects good news from certified court documents. The paper inside had all the trappings of legitimacy. There was a case number, a judge's name, official-looking seals, and most terrifyingly, a summons ordering me, Quincy Richardson, to appear in court within 14 days to answer for multiple violations of the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association covenants. According to this document, I was facing fines totaling $47,000 for infractions ranging from unauthorized mailbox modifications to disturbing the peace. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I read through the entire thing 3 times, my coffee growing cold beside me. The document claimed I had painted my mailbox the wrong shade of beige, parked my work truck in my driveway overnight on 17 separate occasions, failed to maintain adequate lawn moisture levels during summer months, and hosted a barbecue that exceeded the allowable decibel levels for residential gatherings. The language was dense and legal-sounding, filled with phrases like pursuant to Covenant Section 12.3 and in accordance with State Statute 47-21. What made my stomach drop even further was the bold text at the bottom warning that failure to appear would result in a default judgment, immediate lien placement on my property, and potential foreclosure proceedings. I had owned my modest 3-bedroom ranch house in Sunset Ridge for only 8 months, and the thought of losing it over some HOA violations seemed absolutely insane. I grabbed my phone and called my buddy Marcus, who worked as a paralegal downtown. "Marcus, man, I need your help. I just got served with court papers from my HOA and I'm freaking out here." His voice came through calm and steady. "Slow down, Quincy. What court is it from?" I looked at the document again. "It says Superior Court Processing Division. There's a case number and everything." "They're saying I owe almost 50 grand in fines." "Superior Court Processing Division," Marcus repeated, and I could hear the skepticism creeping into his voice. "That's not a thing, buddy. Maricopa County Superior Court doesn't have a processing division with that name. Who signed the summons?" My eyes scanned down to the signature line. Judge Margaret Thornberry. There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "Quincy, there's no Judge Thornberry in the Maricopa County court system. Not in Superior Court, not anywhere. Let me ask you something else. How was this delivered?" "Certified mail. I had to sign for it." "From the court or from the HOA?" I looked at the envelope again, really looked at it this time. The return address said Superior Court Processing Division, but when I checked the postage label, it had been sent from a private mailbox store in Scottsdale. "Oh my God, this is fake, isn't it?" "Sounds like it to me," Marcus said. "But don't just take my word for it. Call the actual court clerk on Monday and give them that case number. I'm betting it doesn't exist. In the meantime, scan that document and email it to me." If your HOA is sending fake court summons, that's seriously illegal. We're talking fraud, impersonating court officials, possibly forgery. This is not okay. After I hung up with Marcus, I sat there staring at the fake summons, and my initial fear started transforming into anger. How dare they try to intimidate me like this? I thought about my neighbors, wondering if any of them had received similar documents. The Sunset Ridge HOA had been a thorn in my side since I moved in, but I never imagined they would stoop to something this egregious. The HOA was run by a woman named Patricia Cunningham, a 52-year-old real estate agent who acted like she was managing a luxury resort instead of a middle-class neighborhood of cookie-cutter houses. She had short blonde hair styled in that specific, "I want to speak to the manager" cut, and she wore pantsuit blazers even when checking people's trash cans for violations. I had met her exactly 3 times, and each encounter had left me feeling exhausted and angry. I spent the rest of Saturday documenting everything. I took high-resolution photos of the envelope, the summons, every single page. I scanned everything and backed it up to 3 different cloud services. Then I started going through my own records, pulling out every single interaction I had ever had with the HOA. There was the welcome letter when I first moved in, outlining 63 pages of covenants and restrictions. There was the first violation notice about my mailbox being desert sand instead of Sahara beige, 2 colors that looked absolutely identical to my eyes. There were the notices about my truck, about my grass, about the time I put my trash cans out at 6 in the evening instead of after 7. Each notice had been increasingly threatening, but nothing had prepared me for a fake court summons. As I organized my documents, I realized this had been an escalation pattern. They started with friendly reminders, moved to stern warnings, then to threats of fines, and now to fabricated legal action. It was a carefully designed intimidation campaign. Sunday morning, I decided to do some reconnaissance. I drove around Sunset Ridge, really paying attention to my neighbors' properties for the first time. What I saw made my blood boil. Mrs. Chen, 3 houses down, had the exact same mailbox as me, painted the same shade I had chosen. The Johnsons across the street had a boat parked in their driveway that had been there for months. The Martinez family, 2 streets over, had brown patches all over their lawn, way worse than mine had ever been. Why was I being targeted specifically? I parked in front of my house and sat there thinking. Then it hit me. My truck. I drove a white Ford F-250 with my company name on the side, Richardson Commercial Electrical. I was an independent electrical contractor, and that truck was my livelihood. Patricia had specifically complained about it during our second encounter, saying that commercial vehicles were unsightly and lowered property values. Never mind that half the neighborhood had work vehicles. Tom Rodriguez was a plumber with a van covered in his business branding. Sarah Park had a catering truck she parked on the street sometimes. But my truck seemed to personally offend Patricia, and I had refused to garage it every single night like she demanded. I needed easy access to my tools and equipment, and besides, the covenants said nothing about commercial vehicles. I had read every single page of those rules specifically to make sure I was in compliance. Monday morning could not come fast enough. I was at the Maricopa County Superior Court clerk's office when they opened at 8. The clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 30s named Jessica according to her name tag, took my case number and typed it into her computer. She frowned, tried again, then looked up at me. "Sir, this case number doesn't exist in our system. Where did you get this document?" I explained the whole situation, and her frown deepened into a scowl. "Can I make a copy of this? This is really serious. Someone is impersonating court documents, and we have a department that handles this kind of fraud." She disappeared into a back office and returned 10 minutes later with an older man in a suit who introduced himself as Richard Palmer, one of the court administrators. He looked at my fake summons like it was a particularly disgusting insect. "Mr. Richardson, this is completely fraudulent. The formatting is wrong. The case number format doesn't match our system, and as you've been told, Judge Thornberry doesn't exist. The seal is a poor quality copy of our actual seal. Whoever made this didn't even get the details right." He pulled out his phone and took photos. "I'm going to pass this to our fraud investigation unit, and I strongly recommend you file a police report. This is illegal on multiple levels." From the courthouse, I went straight to the Phoenix Police Department's non-emergency office and spent 2 hours filing a detailed report. The officer taking my statement, a young guy named Officer Reeves, seemed genuinely angry on my behalf. "HOAs can be rough, but this crosses every line," he said, typing rapidly. "Impersonating court documents, fraud, attempted extortion through intimidation. This will get kicked up to our fraud division. Do you have any evidence that specific individuals from the HOA created this?" "Not yet," I admitted. "But the HOA president is Patricia Cunningham, and she's been harassing me for months. I have documentation of all her previous violation notices." "Bring all of that to the fraud detectives when they contact you. They'll want to see the escalation pattern. It helps establish motive and intent." By Monday evening, I was exhausted but determined. I had filed the police report, notified the court, and contacted Marcus to ask about getting a lawyer. He recommended someone named Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in HOA disputes and civil litigation. I called her office and managed to get an appointment for Wednesday morning. Tuesday, I decided to reach out to my neighbors. I started with the house directly next to mine, where a young couple named David and Stephanie Miller lived with their 2 kids. I knocked on their door after dinner time, and David answered wearing a Phoenix Suns jersey and looking confused. "Hey, Quincy, what's up? Sorry to bother you, but I need to ask you something. Have you had any problems with the HOA? Specifically, have you received any legal documents or court summons?" His expression changed immediately. "Oh man, yes. Stephanie's been stressed out about it for weeks. Come in, come in." Inside their living room, Stephanie pulled out a manila envelope from a desk drawer. Inside was a summons nearly identical to mine, claiming they owed $32,000 for violations including an unauthorized shed in their backyard, inappropriate window treatments, and excessive noise from their children playing outside. The same fake court header, the same non-existent judge's name, the same threatening language about foreclosure. "We've been saving every penny to pay a lawyer," Stephanie said, and I could see the stress lines around her eyes. "We can't afford to lose our house." "David's been working overtime and I picked up extra nursing shifts. We're terrified." My anger ratcheted up another notch. "It's fake. The whole thing is completely fake." I took mine to the actual courthouse this morning and they confirmed the case number doesn't exist. The judge doesn't exist. None of it is real. Stephanie's hands flew to her mouth. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. I filed a police report. You should do the same." "How many other people do you think got these?" We spent the next 3 hours going door to door through Sunset Ridge. Out of the 78 houses in our development, we found 11 other families who had received fake summons. 11 families who had been living in fear, scraping together money for lawyers, losing sleep, and suffering panic attacks over fraudulent documents. The amounts varied from $20,000 to $65,000. The violations were different for each family, but the format and the threats were identical. By the end of Tuesday night, I had a group of 12 angry homeowners in my living room, all comparing their fake summons and sharing horror stories about Patricia Cunningham and the HOA board. Tom Rodriguez, the plumber, told us about how Patricia had tried to fine him for parking his work van on the street overnight after a 16-hour emergency call. Sarah Park, the caterer, described being cited for having commercial food odors emanating from her house when she was testing recipes in her own kitchen. "She's drunk on power," said James Chen, whose mailbox had apparently also been the wrong color. I've lived here for 4 years and it just keeps getting worse. But fake court documents, that's criminal. It absolutely is, I said. I've already filed a police report and the court is investigating. Everyone here needs to do the same. The more evidence we have, the stronger the case against her and whoever else is involved. Wednesday morning, I met with Jennifer Walsh, the attorney. She was a sharp woman in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a bun and glasses that made her look like she could dissect an argument at 50 paces. Her office in downtown Phoenix was lined with law books and framed case victories. I showed her everything. My fake summons, the 11 others from my neighbors, the escalation pattern of violation notices, photos of similar violations by other homeowners who had not been cited, and copies of all my police reports and court documents. She listened carefully, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and shook her head slowly. Mr. Richardson, in 15 years of practicing HOA law, I have never seen anything this egregious. This isn't just a violation of HOA regulations or even an overzealous board. This is organized fraud, forgery of legal documents, and attempted extortion. The criminal penalties for this are severe. We're talking felony charges. What should we do? I asked. First, I'm going to file a civil suit on behalf of you and any other homeowners who want to join. We'll be seeking damages for emotional distress, fraud, and civil conspiracy. Second, I'm going to contact the Arizona Attorney General's office because this falls under their Consumer Fraud Division. Third, we need to make sure every single person who received one of these documents files a police report. The criminal investigation is crucial. Will we win? She gave me a grim smile. Mr. Richardson, you're going to win so hard that this HOA is going to cease to exist by the time we're done. But I need to be honest with you. This is going to take time. Months, probably. Maybe longer. You need to be prepared for that. Over the next 2 weeks, things accelerated rapidly. Jennifer filed a massive civil lawsuit naming Patricia Cunningham. The other 2 HOA board members, Brenda Morrison and Kenneth Talbot, and the HOA itself as defendants. The lawsuit included all 12 families who had received fake summons, plus 3 more we discovered after word spread through the neighborhood. The local news got wind of the story and suddenly, I had reporters calling me. I agreed to be interviewed by Channel 12 News, and the segment aired on a Thursday evening. The reporter, an earnest woman named Amanda Chen, stood in front of my house and held up a copy of the fake summons. 15 families in this quiet Phoenix neighborhood have been living in fear after receiving what appeared to be official court summons, threatening them with tens of thousands of dollars in fines and potential foreclosure. But these documents were completely fake, allegedly created by their own homeowners association in what authorities are calling an unprecedented case of fraud and intimidation. The segment showed brief interviews with me, with Stephanie Miller, and with Tom Rodriguez. It showed the real Maricopa County Superior Court building and featured a statement from the court administrator confirming that the documents were fraudulent. By Friday morning, the story had been picked up by the Phoenix newspaper, the Associated Press, and several national news outlets. Patricia Cunningham's response was to double down. She sent an email to all Sunset Ridge residents claiming that the summons were legitimate, that we were troublemakers spreading false information, and that the HOA had every right to enforce covenants through legal action. She attached a document supposedly from a law firm called Arizona Property Compliance Attorneys backing up her position. Jennifer Walsh looked up the law firm and called me laughing. It doesn't exist. She just made up an entire law firm. This woman cannot stop digging herself deeper. The police investigation moved forward. Detective Maria Rodriguez from the Fraud Division contacted me and conducted a 3-hour interview, going through every document, every interaction, every piece of evidence. She was thorough and professional, and she told me that they had already interviewed Patricia Cunningham, who had claimed the summons were prepared by the HOA's attorney and that she had no knowledge they were fake. The problem with her story, Detective Rodriguez said, is that when we asked for the name of the HOA attorney, she gave us the name of the fake law firm. And when we checked the HOA's financial records, which we subpoenaed, there are no payments to any attorney or law firm in the past 6 months. So either she's lying about having an attorney or she made the documents herself. Can you tell which? I asked. We're working on it. We've subpoenaed her personal computer and phone records. We'll know soon. In the meantime, life in Sunset Ridge became surreal. Half the neighborhood was firmly on our side, angry at the HOA and supportive of the lawsuit. The other half seemed to think we were troublemakers who should just pay the fines and follow the rules. There were heated arguments at the neighborhood pool and uncomfortable silences at the mailbox clusters. Patricia still walked around the neighborhood like she owned it, clipboard in hand, writing down violations. I watched her one morning from my kitchen window as she stood in front of my house, staring at my truck with visible hatred on her face. She spent a full 5 minutes examining it, walking around it, taking photos with her phone. Then she walked up my driveway to my front door. I answered before she could knock. "Patricia, what can I do for you?" Her smile was tight and fake. "Mr. Richardson, I'm conducting a routine inspection and I've noticed your vehicle has mud on the tires. Section 18.7 of our covenants requires that all vehicles be maintained in clean condition." I looked at my truck. There was a tiny speck of dirt on the front passenger tire. "You're joking." "I never joke about covenant enforcement. You'll be receiving a violation notice." She made a note on her clipboard with exaggerated precision. "Patricia, you're currently being sued for fraud and investigated by the police for multiple felonies. Maybe now isn't the time to be writing violation notices over imaginary dirt." Her face flushed red. "Those accusations are completely false and defamatory. The HOA has consulted with our legal counsel, and we are considering counter-suing you and your little group for harassment and slander. You people moved into Sunset Ridge and agreed to follow our rules. If you didn't want to be part of a well-maintained community, you should have bought elsewhere. Fake court documents aren't rules, Patricia. They're crimes. We'll see what a real judge has to say about that." She spun on her heel and marched away, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. That evening, I got a call from Detective Rodriguez. "Mr. Richardson, I wanted to give you an update. We've analyzed Patricia Cunningham's home computer, and we found draft versions of the fake summons documents saved in her Microsoft Word folders. We also found a downloaded template for legal documents that matches the formatting of your summons. Additionally, we found Google searches in her browser history for terms like how to make legal documents look official and Arizona court summons format. So she made them herself. Yes, and it gets better. We found emails between Patricia and the other board members, where she discusses the summons and mentions that they'll scare people into compliance without having to actually go through the expensive court process. The other board members, Morrison and Talbot, knew exactly what she was doing and approved it. "When will you arrest them?" "We're coordinating with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office on charges. It should be within the next few days. Each of them will be charged with multiple counts of forgery, fraud, criminal impersonation, and attempted theft by extortion. "These are serious felonies, Mr. Richardson. They're looking at potential prison time." The arrests happened on a Tuesday morning, and because the story had gotten so much media attention, the news cameras were there to film it. I wasn't present, but I watched the footage later on the evening news. Patricia Cunningham being led out of her house in handcuffs, her face pale and shocked, insisting loudly that this was a mistake. Brenda Morrison crying in her driveway as officers put her in the back of a patrol car. Kenneth Talbot trying to maintain dignity and failing as neighbors stood on their porches watching. The charges were extensive. Patricia faced 15 counts of forgery, 15 counts of fraud, 15 counts of criminal impersonation of a legal process, and 15 counts of attempted theft by extortion, one for each fake summons. Brenda and Kenneth faced fewer charges, but still serious felonies for their roles in approving and helping to distribute the documents. The HOA itself effectively collapsed overnight. Without a functioning board and with all 3 board members facing criminal charges, there was nobody to run the organization. Jennifer Walsh filed an emergency motion to place the HOA under court supervision, which was granted. A neutral third-party management company was appointed to handle basic necessities like landscaping of common areas, but all enforcement actions were suspended indefinitely. The preliminary hearing was set for 6 weeks after the arrests. During that time, more information kept coming out. Investigators discovered that Patricia had been skimming money from HOA dues for personal expenses, using the association's credit card for vacations and shopping sprees. The HOA's finances were a disaster, with nearly $40,000 unaccounted for over a 2-year period. Brenda Morrison took a plea deal first, agreeing to testify against Patricia in exchange for reduced charges. She admitted in her statement that Patricia had been the mastermind behind the fake summons scheme, but that she and Kenneth had gone along with it because Patricia convinced them it would work and save the HOA money on legal fees. Kenneth followed with his own plea deal a week later. His testimony was even more damning. He described how Patricia had become obsessed with enforcing every tiny detail of the covenants, how she spent hours driving around the neighborhood looking for violations, how she kept spreadsheets ranking homeowners by their level of compliance. He also testified that she had specifically targeted me because I had disrespected her authority by refusing to garage my truck. The civil lawsuit moved forward in parallel with the criminal case. Jennifer Walsh was like a force of nature, filing motion after motion, deposing witnesses, gathering evidence. The HOA's insurance company initially tried to deny coverage, claiming that intentional criminal acts weren't covered under the policy. Jennifer argued that the individual homeowners who were victims shouldn't be punished for the board's crimes, and eventually negotiated a settlement from the insurance company. 3 months after I received that first fake summons, I sat in a conference room with Jennifer and the other 14 families who had been victimized. Jennifer had just finished explaining the settlement offer. The insurance company is offering $800,000 to be split among all plaintiffs. After legal fees and expenses, each family would receive approximately $40,000. The HOA itself is being dissolved, and all covenants will be voided. The property will transition to a deed-restricted community with minimal rules and no enforcement power. "What about Patricia and the others?" Tom Rodriguez asked. "What happens to them?" "Patricia is going to trial. She refused every plea deal offered. She's facing up to 20 years in prison if convicted on all counts. Brenda and Kenneth have pleaded guilty to reduced charges and will likely serve 18 to 24 months, followed by probation. Additionally, all three are being sued personally by the insurance company for reimbursement of the settlement funds. Stephanie Miller raised her hand hesitantly. So our nightmare is actually over, Jennifer smiled. Yes, it's over. You won. There were hugs and tears and relief so profound, it felt physical. I shook hands with neighbors who had been strangers 8 months ago but were now bonded by shared trauma and victory. We had stood together against something genuinely evil and had won. Patricia Cunningham's trial took place 5 months after her arrest. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery with my neighbors. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They had the fake documents, the computer evidence, the emails, the testimony from Brenda and Kenneth, the testimony from all 15 victims, and expert testimony from court officials about how the forgeries worked. Patricia's defense attorney tried to argue that she had believed the documents were legitimate, that someone else must have created them on her computer, that she was a dedicated community volunteer being railroaded by disgruntled homeowners. None of it landed. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. At sentencing, the judge was harsh. Patricia stood before him, diminished and pale, no longer the authoritarian figure who had marched through Sunset Ridge with her clipboard. Miss Cunningham, the judge said, you abused a position of trust to terrorize your neighbors. You created fake legal documents specifically designed to frighten people into compliance. 15 families, including children, elderly residents, and hardworking people, lived in fear of losing their homes because of your actions. You showed no remorse, no understanding of the severity of your crimes. This court sentences you to 12 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. Patricia's knees buckled, and she had to be held up by her attorney. 12 years. She would be 64 years old when she got out. Her real estate license was permanently revoked. Her life as she had known it was over. Brenda Morrison and Kenneth Talbot were sentenced a week later. Brenda got 20 months with credit for time served. Kenneth got 22 months. Both would be eligible for early release with good behavior. Both looked genuinely remorseful, which the judge took into account. The final piece of the puzzle came 8 months after that initial fake summons arrived at my house. The civil settlement checks were distributed, the HOA was officially dissolved, and new deed restrictions were filed with the county that basically said maintain your property reasonably and don't be a nuisance to your neighbors. No rules about mailbox colors, no restrictions on work vehicles. No maximum decibel levels for backyard barbecues. I stood in my driveway on a warm Phoenix evening, looking at my house. My white Ford F-250 sat proudly in the driveway, recently washed, but with honest dirt on the tires from a job site. My mailbox was painted desert sand, or Sahara beige, or whatever the hell color it actually was. My grass was green in some spots and brown in others, because it was grass, and that's what grass does. Tom Rodriguez walked over from across the street, carrying 2 beers. He handed me one and we tapped bottles. Hard to believe it's been almost a year, he said. Craziest year of my life, I admitted. When I opened that envelope, I thought my world was ending. Instead, Patricia's world ended. He took a sip of beer. Think she'll ever understand what she did wrong, honestly? No. I think she still believes she was right, that we were the problem for not following her rules. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Kids rode bikes down the street. Someone a few houses down was grilling, and the smell of burgers drifted through the evening air. The Martinez family's dog barked at a passing jogger. It was just a normal neighborhood full of normal people living normal lives, and it had almost been destroyed by one person's need for control and power. But we had fought back. We had stood together, documented everything, followed the legal process, and won. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw the news about the sentencing. Justice served. Proud of you, man. I smiled and texted back. Thanks. Couldn't have done it without you. Another text came through, this time from Jennifer Walsh. Final paperwork filed with the county. It's officially over. Congratulations, Quincy. Tom noticed my smile. Good news, the best. It's really, truly, completely over. He raised his beer bottle. To the end of the Sunset Ridge HOA and the beginning of just being neighbors. I clinked my bottle against his. I'll drink to that. Inside my house, the fake summons was filed away in a folder in my office, kept as a reminder of how close things had come to disaster and how important it was to stand up against injustice, even when it came wearing a pantsuit and carrying a clipboard. I had learned that documents aren't automatically legitimate just because they look official. I had learned that fear is a tool used by bullies to maintain control. And I had learned that communities are stronger when people stand together instead of being divided by arbitrary rules. The settlement money went toward renovating my kitchen and building up my savings. Some of my neighbors used theirs to take vacations, to pay off debt, to invest in their homes. Stephanie and David Miller put theirs toward their kids' college funds. Tom Rodriguez bought a second work van and hired an assistant, expanding his plumbing business. Life moved forward. Seasons changed. Summer turned to fall, turned to winter, turned to spring. The Sunset Ridge neighborhood, freed from the oppressive weight of HOA enforcement, became a friendlier place. People still maintained their properties because they took pride in their homes, not because they feared violation notices. Block parties happened spontaneously, instead of requiring forms and permits. Kids played outside without worrying about noise complaints. I ran into Brenda Morrison about 18 months after everything started, completely by chance at a grocery store in Scottsdale. She had served her time and looked different now, older and humbler. She saw me and froze, clearly debating whether to run or speak. I made the decision for her. Brenda, Quincy, hi. She looked uncomfortable, her hands gripping the shopping cart. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I was wrong. We were all wrong, but especially me. I should have stood up to Patricia instead of going along with it. I studied her for a moment. She looked genuinely remorseful, not just sorry she got caught. You made a mistake. You paid for it. What matters now is what you do going forward. She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I'm working as a bookkeeper now, nothing glamorous. I've been volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping people understand their rights, trying to make amends, I guess. That's good. That's really good. We talked for a few more minutes and then parted ways. I felt strange driving home, processing that encounter. Forgiveness is complicated. Brenda had been part of something that terrorized 15 families, but she had also genuinely changed. She was trying to make things right. That had to count for something. Patricia Cunningham, on the other hand, showed no such growth. According to news reports from prison interviews, she maintained her innocence and claimed she was the victim of a conspiracy by ungrateful homeowners who didn't appreciate her dedication to maintaining property values. She became something of a cautionary tale in HOA management circles, with her case studied in training seminars about the limits of enforcement authority. 2 years after the initial incident, I was invited to speak at a conference for HOA board members in Tucson. The organizers wanted me to share my story as a warning about what not to do. I was hesitant at first, but Jennifer Walsh encouraged me to go. "These people need to hear from someone who was victimized by an out-of-control board," she said. "Maybe you can prevent this from happening to someone else." So I drove to Tucson and stood in front of 200 HOA board members and managers, and I told them my story. I showed them copies of the fake summons. I described the fear and stress it caused. I explained the legal consequences Patricia and her board had faced. And I gave them some simple advice. Remember that you're serving your community, not ruling it. Your neighbors are people, not subjects. Rules exist to maintain quality of life, not to give you power. And if you ever find yourself thinking about using fear or intimidation to enforce compliance, stop. Just stop. Because the momentary satisfaction you might get from making someone afraid is not worth destroying lives, including your own. The room was silent when I finished. Then someone started clapping, and soon the entire audience was applauding. Afterward, dozens of people came up to shake my hand and thank me for sharing my experience. Several admitted they had been heading down similar authoritarian paths, and my story had shaken them out of it. One woman, a board president from Flagstaff, told me with tears in her eyes that she had been planning to send increasingly threatening letters to a homeowner who kept parking his boat in his driveway. But that's his property. He's not hurting anyone. I was about to become Patricia Cunningham over a boat. Thank you for stopping me. That made the whole trip worthwhile. Back in Phoenix, life continued its new normal. I landed a major contract with a commercial property developer and hired 2 apprentice electricians to help with the workload. My business thrived, and my white Ford F-250 sat in my driveway every single night, unmolested and unquestioned. The former Sunset Ridge HOA property became a case study at Arizona State University's Law School and Business School. Jennifer Walsh was invited to give guest lectures about HOA law and the importance of ethical leadership. I even joined her for one lecture, providing the homeowner's perspective to a room full of law students who looked appropriately horrified by what Patricia had done. 3 years after receiving that fake summons, I was elected to the newly formed Sunset Ridge Neighborhood Association, a voluntary organization with no enforcement power that existed purely to organize social events and maintain the small park at the entrance to our development. Our meetings were casual, friendly affairs held in people's backyards with snacks and drinks. Nobody carried clipboards. Nobody cited violations. We just talked about community issues like reasonable adults. At one meeting, Tom Rodriguez suggested we put up a memorial plaque at the park commemorating the end of tyranny and the beginning of neighborliness. We all laughed, but then Stephanie Miller said, "No, seriously, we should do something." We went through something terrible together and came out stronger. That's worth remembering. We ended up planting 15 trees, one for each family that had received fake summons, along the edge of the park. Each tree had a small plaque with the family's name and the year. It wasn't about victimhood, but about resilience and community strength. The dedication ceremony was covered by the local news, with Amanda Chen returning to do a "Where are they now?" follow-up piece. Standing there with my neighbors, watching our kids run around the park while the news cameras filmed and Amanda Chen interviewed people, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude that I had questioned the fake summons instead of just accepting it. Gratitude for Marcus and Jennifer and Detective Rodriguez and all the other people who had helped us fight back. Gratitude for neighbors who became friends through shared adversity. My phone rang and I stepped away to answer it. It was the Arizona Attorney General's office. They were creating a task force to investigate HOA abuse across the state and wanted to know if I would be willing to serve on an advisory board, bringing the homeowner perspective to policy discussions. Of course, I said without hesitation. Whatever I can do to help. Because that's what this whole experience had taught me. Injustice thrives when good people stay silent. Communities are only as strong as their willingness to stand together against abuse of power. And sometimes the scariest-looking official documents are just smoke and mirrors created by bullies who count on fear to keep people compliant. Patricia Cunningham had bet that we would be too scared to question her fake summons, too intimidated to push back, too isolated to band together. She had been wrong on all counts, and that wrongness had cost her everything while teaching the rest of us invaluable lessons about courage, community, and justice. As I rejoined the celebration at the park, Tom handed me another beer and grinned. So, advisory board for the Attorney General. Look at you, getting all official. Someone has to make sure no other neighborhood goes through what we did. Think it'll make a difference. I looked around at the 15 trees, at the happy families, at the neighborhood that had survived and thrived despite Patricia's best efforts to destroy it. Yeah, I really do. The sun was setting again, painting Phoenix in those incredible desert colors that never got old. Kids were still playing, people were still laughing, and somewhere in a prison yard, Patricia Cunningham was learning that power built on fear and lies doesn't last. Real communities, built on mutual respect and genuine care, endure. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from a homeowner in Mesa who had just received a suspicious-looking court summons from their HOA. They had seen my news interviews and wanted advice. I immediately called Jennifer Walsh, who conference called the homeowner and walked them through exactly what to do. Verify with the court, file a police report, document everything, and don't be intimidated. This became a pattern over the following months. I became an informal resource for homeowners across Arizona dealing with HOA abuse. Some cases were as bad as mine. Others were less severe but still represented serious overreach. In every case, I shared what I had learned and connected people with resources to fight back effectively and legally. The advisory board for the Attorney General met quarterly in downtown Phoenix. We drafted model legislation to regulate HOA enforcement actions, require transparent financial reporting, and create consequences for board members who abuse their authority. Some of the legislation passed, some didn't. But progress was happening, slowly and incrementally. 4 years after that fake summons arrived, I was sitting on my back patio on a Saturday morning, coffee in hand, when my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a young couple, probably in their late 20s, holding a baby. "Mr. Richardson," the man asked nervously. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Jake and this is my wife Emma. We're thinking about buying the house 2 streets over, the one on Desert Bloom Drive. The realtor told us about what happened here with the HOA. We wanted to hear about it directly from you before we make an offer." I invited them in and spent an hour telling them the whole story. Emma looked increasingly alarmed as I talked, but Jake seemed more interested in how it had been resolved. "So there's no HOA at all now?" Jake asked. "No enforcement arm," I clarified. "We have a voluntary neighborhood association that handles the park maintenance and organizes events, but nobody can fine you or threaten you or tell you what color to paint your mailbox." Emma relaxed visibly. "That sounds perfect, actually. We were worried because Jake's a contractor and he needs to park his work truck at home." I smiled. "Funny you should mention that. Come look at my driveway." I showed them my Ford F-250, still proudly displaying Richardson Commercial Electrical on the sides. "Park whatever you want. This is your home. As long as you're not running a junkyard or doing something genuinely dangerous, nobody cares." They bought the house, and I gained 2 more neighbors who became friends. The neighborhood kept growing and evolving, filled with people who chose to live there because of the freedom and community spirit, not despite the lack of authoritarian rule. Patricia Cunningham became eligible for parole after serving 8 years. I was notified because victims have the right to provide statements at parole hearings. I debated whether to attend or submit a written statement or do nothing at all. After talking it through with Jennifer Walsh and with my wife Sarah, whom I had married 2 years earlier, I decided to submit a written statement. I wrote about the fear and stress she had caused. I wrote about the 15 families who had been terrorized. I wrote about the destruction of trust within a community. But I also wrote that I believed in rehabilitation and redemption, and that if she had genuinely understood the harm she caused and changed her thinking, she deserved a second chance. Her parole was denied. According to the board's statement, Patricia showed insufficient remorse and continued to minimize her actions. She would be eligible for another hearing in 2 years. Life went on. My business continued to grow. Sarah and I bought a second property as an investment. We talked about starting a family. The Sunset Ridge neighborhood thrived, with property values actually increasing after the HOA's dissolution, contrary to Patricia's predictions. Turns out people preferred freedom over fascism, even in their homeowners associations. 5 years after the initial incident, on the anniversary of the day I received the fake summons, I stood at the park where the 15 trees had grown tall and strong. Some of the original families had moved away, pursuing jobs or retirement in other cities. New families had moved in. The neighborhood evolved, as all neighborhoods do, but the trees remained, a living reminder of what we had survived and overcome. I touched the plaque with my family name and thought about everything that had happened, because I had chosen to verify that suspicious document instead of just accepting it as legitimate. One fake summons had unraveled an entire criminal conspiracy. One person questioning authority had sparked a movement that protected hundreds of other homeowners across Arizona. One community standing together had defeated a bully and created something better in the aftermath. My phone rang. It was Marcus, my paralegal friend who had helped me on that very first day. "Hey, Quincy, just calling to say I'm thinking about you today. 5 years, right?" 5 years, I confirmed. "Hard to believe. You changed a lot of things, man, you know that, right?" That legislation that just passed requiring HOA boards to have oversight committees, that was directly inspired by your case. It wasn't just me. It was 15 families, Jennifer Walsh, Detective Rodriguez, a lot of people. "Yeah, but you were the first one to stand up and say this isn't right." That matters. After we hung up, I sat on a bench in the park and watched the sun set once more over Phoenix. Sarah joined me, bringing sandwiches from the deli we both loved. We sat together in comfortable silence, eating and watching the sky change colors. "You ever regret buying this house?" she asked. Given everything that happened, I thought about it seriously. No, never. This house, this neighborhood taught me things I needed to learn, about courage, about community, about the importance of questioning authority and standing up for what's right. Plus it gave you a hell of a story to tell at parties, I laughed. That too. We walked home as the streetlights flickered on. My house looked warm and welcoming, lights glowing in the windows. My truck sat in the driveway exactly where it belonged. No clipboard-wielding tyrant would ever change that. The fake summons from Patricia Cunningham had been designed to frighten me into submission. Instead, it had sparked a fight that ended her reign of terror, protected countless other homeowners, and helped reform HOA laws across an entire state. The weapon she had created to destroy me had ultimately destroyed her instead, while making me and my community stronger. That night, I pulled out the folder containing that original fake summons. I looked at it one last time, really looked at it, seeing all the details that should have screamed fraud but had initially just screamed fear. Then I fed it into my paper shredder and watched it turn into confetti. I didn't need to keep it anymore. The lessons were learned. The battles were won. The story was told. It was time to let it go completely and just live the life I had fought so hard to protect. A free life in a free home in a community of neighbors, not subjects. Patricia Cunningham had tried to rule a neighborhood through fear and lies. She had failed spectacularly. And in her failure, she had accidentally created something she never intended. A community that truly understood the value of freedom, the importance of questioning authority, and the power of standing together against injustice. That was her legacy, though not the one she had hoped for, and I could live with that. We all could.